There's always a waiting list because the numbers of elderly is increasing every year, and the facilities just didn't get built in time to meet the needs.
Hello, I'm Dan Richards. Welcome to Money Insights. My guest today is Mary Ellen Tomlinson, founder and president of Senior Care Options. Mary Ellen brings 15 years of experience in elder care, has a degree in gerontology, and this is part of a series of conversations that we're having on elder care issues. Mary Ellen, today we're going to be talking about a real hot-button issue for a lot of seniors and their children and family members, and that's the cost related to the different options in terms of housing in retirement. Before we get into the details of the cost, just summarize briefly, if you could, what are the different major kinds of options in terms of housing for seniors?
The major housing options are, if you're moving out of your own home, is into going to a retirement home. If you need more care, you can go into assisted living, and if you need the absolute top level of care, you'll go into a long-term care facility. Before we get into the cost of the different kinds of housing options, are there common universal costs for seniors regardless of the kind of housing option they use? Oh, for sure. Aging is expensive. You have drugs that you have to pay for. You might have wheelchair. You might have to have oxygen. You might have to have hearing aids. You might have to have canes. You might have to have adaptations made to your house or wherever you're living. All of these things cost money. Now, all across Canada, there are service providers who will supplement that. In Ontario, we have an assisted adaptation program so that you can recover some of the money from that. But you have to check out which piece of equipment you're getting and how much money you're getting. If you're a veteran, you get a lot of really good services. You even get things like getting your grass cut or your snow shoveled. It's good payoff if you've put in those hours of work in the military. Right. So let's get into the specifics of kind of a ballpark of costs. And let's assume we're in a major urban center, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver. And in that first category that you talked about, which is a retirement home, what would be a typical range in terms of monthly costs there? That can go from $2,500 up to $5,500. If you have another person living with you, in other words, if the couple goes in, you add $600 a month to that bill. The ones that are really expensive are like cruise ships. So you get a lot of bells and whistles. But a basic one is sometimes between $2,000 and $3,000. And what's the high end? What's the largest amount that you've seen any of your clients spend on a monthly basis for that kind of thing? $6,000. Okay, so $6,000 is kind of the high end. What about the next level, which is where you need more care, and now you're into assisted living? What would be the range there? Well, that would be around $2,000 or $3,000, and the reason that's a little cheaper, even though you're getting a higher level of care, is because usually those are cultural groups or religious organizations running them. Not all, but mainly that's what it is. So they have maybe a foundation or they have a philosophy of care, and they're trying to fill the person's needs without breaking the bank. So when it comes, Mary Ellen, to some of those assisted living facilities, ones that are run by a cultural group or a community organization, Rotary maybe, or an ethnic group, can there be a waiting list to get into those? For sure. There's always a waiting list because the numbers of elderly is increasing every year, and the facilities just didn't get built in time to meet the needs. So there will be a waiting list for sure. Okay, and let's move on to the third level of housing, the highest level of care, which is long-term care. What kind of price range are we talking about there? Well, in Ontario, all of the long-term care facilities cost the same. So it's between $1,000 and $2,000 for semi-private and $2,200 approximately for a private. So in other provinces, I'm not exactly sure how much it would be, but I'm sure it's the equivalent. And now that provides me a
perhaps a basic level of care. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, you'll have 3 meals a day, 2 snacks. That's legislated in Ontario. You'll have all your medicine taken care of. You'll have any pieces of equipment that you maybe can't afford, they will provide it. Let's say a wheelchair. It's much nicer if you can provide your own. You might get a more comfortable wheelchair. You won't get things like personal grooming. So that's an issue for clothing and hair and various things like that.
Typically people pay extra for that?
Yes, they do.
And what kind of cost are we looking about there?
Well, a haircut for men, I'm not sure because I don't know. My husband's bald, so I don't know how much they cost. But I should imagine it's about $6 to $10. And for a woman, it'll be maybe for a hair, $20, $30, something like that.
And this is for somebody in that home?
Yes.
And suppose somebody needs an attendant. What kind of cost are we looking about there?
That's really, really expensive. If it's not provided by the government, then you're talking around $20 an hour and usually a 3-hour minimum. I will say, though, if you're getting some health care by the government, you can save on the GST on that bill for the private attendant, and you may be able to claim something on your income tax as well. Depends on the circumstances and what other claims you're making on income tax.
Mary Ellen, to this point in time, we've been talking about the large urban centers. What happens if we're talking about a smaller center? Does the cost come down in those cases?
Well, you hope the services are there. The one thing about the metropolitan areas is you've got a lot of variety of services, but then you go into the smaller towns, they might not have it. The next town over may have something, but your town may not. And if you're in a farming area, you're in real trouble. Unless you're living with the family and they're very devoted in terms of getting you care, in a farming area, it's very, very tough. It's just the mileage and the staffing to do care.
Okay. You know, the last question, you know, we've talked about costs to this point in time for someone that has chosen to move out of their house and go into some kind of a facility. What kind of costs are we looking at if someone says, I don't want to do that, I want to stay in the home that I've been in all my life?
If they can afford to do it, that's fine. They'll just have to bring in all the pieces of equipment and they'll have to pay for a lot of it. Central Mortgage and Housing will pay for maybe a ramp or this or that, but not very much. And that's usually geared to your income. So the higher your income, the less likely that they'll help you out with that. The one thing I have for people who stay in their own homes, they need a big social network because they get isolated and lonely. And that's the one thing about being in a facility. There's people coming and going. Maybe they're not visiting you, but they might be visiting the other person. So there's a little bit of liveliness. So if you're going to stay in your own home, you really need a good social network.
Mary Ellen, thank you very much.
You're welcome.